Good afternoon. It's actually still good morning right now. We are continuing with our Unit 2 that we started yesterday. We have another PO right away. We had PO7 yesterday, PO8 today. Power objectives. We need to make sure we understand how these are working. I can add and subtract rational numbers. All those negative numbers. We know 3 plus 4 is 7. We got that. Now we need to work with those negative numbers. So using a number line really could help us, save us from some simple mistakes. So let's review how to add and subtract each type of rational number. You will not be able to use a calculator on the test, but you may use one now to check answers. So on the test, we won't be using the calculator for the subjective. But when we do our homework, you write it out the long way and then check it with a calculator to see if you're doing it correctly. So when it comes time to the test, we are doing them correctly. So, integers. When you add, the operation becomes addition. The direction on the number line. So if I have my number line up here, there's my number line. When I'm adding, I'm going to the right. So if I'm starting at a negative number, I'm going to the right. If I'm starting at a positive number, I go to the right. An example would be 10 plus 14 equals 24. So I would start at 10, I would add on that 14 all the way till I get to 24. So I'm going to the right. When we add a negative, our operation actually becomes subtraction. And we're going to go to the left on our number line. So an example of this would be 10 plus negative 14. So I would start at that 10, but I'm adding a negative 14, so I'm going to the left. I'm going to subtract 14, and I'm going to end up at negative 4, because I'm going to the left with that negative number. When we subtract, we are using subtraction. And we are going to the left on the number line. An example would be 10 minus 14 equals that negative 4. So for the one on top and this one, we started at that 10, adding a negative, we go to the left, subtracting a positive, we're still going to the left. Then if we subtract a negative, the operation becomes addition. So that means we're going to the right on our number line. So if we have 10 minus a negative 14, that is going to equal 24. Because when we subtract a negative, here's how I always make it look. So 10 minus negative 14, what I do to that is I actually go on and say, okay, I'm adding a positive. If you subtract a negative, it's the same as adding a positive. So if you subtract a negative, you add the positive. So subtracting your negative, you're adding, and you're going to the right. So just note that only works with subtracting a negative. Only when you subtract the negative can you turn it into that adding. Yeah, it just flips.
You can't just flip for add a negative.
Say that again. So negative 10 plus negative 14, if we're adding a negative, it's actually subtracting.
So 10 minus 14.
So if we start at negative 10, so negative 10's here. Remember, if you're adding a negative, you're subtracting. So it would be negative 24. So you always, this first number just tells you where you're starting on that number line. Am I starting at a positive 10? Am I starting at that negative 10? That first number just tells you where you start on the number line. Then you have to look, am I adding? I go to the right. Am I adding a negative? I'm going to the left. So negative 10 plus negative 14, I'm adding a negative, so I'm going to go to my left. We're going to be working with this table today, so it will make more sense. I highly recommend that when it comes time to the test, you put that table on your help sheet with a number line. So you remember, first number's where I start on the number line. And then what am I doing? Am I going to the left or to the right? You go.
Having the number line, would that be an example?
No.
Oh.
If you put this, 10 plus 14 equals 24, that's an example. The number line is not an example, it's a tool. And we can always put tools like that on our help sheets. So let's look at this. I'm going to erase this so we can focus. So if we're at negative 7 plus 9, where do I start on my number line? What number am I going to start at? Negative 7. So I'm going to start at negative 7, and I'm going to add 9. What direction am I going to go? Evelyn? What direction on the number line am I going? If I'm adding a positive, I'm going to the right. How many places to the right am I going? 9. So I start at negative 7. I'm going to write my number line nice and big right here just to make it easier. So I'm starting at negative 7. And I'm going to count over 9 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I end at a positive 2. So using that number line can really help us in making sure that we're getting our answer correct. Another way of looking at it, negative 7, I know it's 7 away, and I want to get up to 9, so it's 2 more to get to that 9. Okay, there are a lot of different ways we can look at solving these problems. The number line, gentlemen, the number line is a super easy way. You just count over how many you're going to the right or how many you're going to the left. Do we always have to start at 0 on our number line? No. So if you're using a big number like negative 25, I would start with negative 25. I know I'm adding a negative 8. So if I'm adding a negative, I'm going to go to the left. So I'm going to go this way. So then I'm going to count it 8 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I know it's negative 33 because I counted it over on my number line. You could also say, okay, negative 25 plus negative 8, that's 25 plus 8 is 33. And I'm going to put the negative in front of it because I know I was going to the left. Audrey. So the parentheses is so it doesn't get confusing. So that is a great question. So let's look at what our numbers look like here. If we did 13 minus negative 4, it looks confusing.
Yeah, like
A
what-
minus and a negative next to each other, or a plus and a negative, it gets confusing. So they just put the parentheses around it, so we know that it's -4. So that's just designating our negative numbers, so it doesn't look confusing. Any other questions on that? Okay, so let's look at what all of our homework is. You are going to do your adding and subtracting. Check your answer. You can use a number line. Calculators are down. Okay, so why does subtracting a negative change to adding? Well, when we subtract, we're finding how far away two values are on the number line. So an expression like 7 minus -4 is asking how far away are 7 and -4 on the number line. The answer is that they are 11 away, which we find by rewriting the expression to be 7 plus 4. So what that looks like is if we are at 7 minus -4, so -4 is way over here. They're 11 away from each other. So 7 minus -4 means they're 11 away from each other on that number line. That's why we can do minus a negative is adding the positive, because we're counting how far from 0 here and how far from 0 here. Okay, it only works with subtracting that negative. You can change it to adding the positive, because we're looking at our distance between our two numbers. Now let's look at our second page. Decimals. Stack the decimals vertically, making sure the decimal points are in a column. Add or subtract the columns, carrying or borrowing when necessary, and drop your decimal point straight down. So, first thing first, line up your decimal points. Super important. Always, always, always line up your decimal points. So if we look at 19.521 and 17.22, if I'm lining up to the end there, what'd I do wrong?
The decimals aren't lined up.
The decimals aren't lined up. You have to make sure that you line your decimals up, so you're adding and subtracting the right place values. So if I line up my decimals, I have my ones, my tens line up, tenths, hundredths line up. If I have an empty space, what do, Evelyn? Fill it in with a 0. Big thing to remember is to double check what operation you're doing. Every time I have pluses and minuses in the same section, I have friends that forget to double check, am I adding or subtracting? Easy mistake to make. Double check you're doing the correct operation. Then we just subtract or add like normal. Carry your decimal point straight down, and you come up with your answer. So just make sure you line up your decimal points. Make sure you double check, am I adding or subtracting? Any questions on adding and subtracting with the decimals?
Nope.
Okay, let's put our pencils down so we're all paying attention instead of working on our work. Lesson time, we want to make sure we're getting all the directions. Fractions. If you have a mixed number, first you're going to convert it to an improper fraction. Then use equivalent fractions to get common denominators. Then you can add or subtract the numerator and the denominator stays the same. Now we had this on our entrance exam, right? I think we worked with our fractions a little bit. So we've already had a little review of this. But remember, your denominator must be the same when we add or subtract. Double caution, add or subtract the numerator only, denominator stays the same. Add or subtract, write your answer in simplest form. You must simplify. If it says simplest form and you don't put it in the simplest form, is it still right?
No.
No. It must be in simplest form to be correct. On the test, if it's not in simplest form, it will not be correct. Pencils down. Chance.
I think you have to do more than like say for, I don't know, do you want to start as a mixed number for him?
Yeah,
Um,
wait, your answer is it?
Like for number,
which number do you think that would be?
second one probably. Like the last.
I would, if it doesn't say to keep it proper, I would accept it either way. So you could have an improper number or change it to a proper mixed number. I'll accept that one either way because it doesn't say specifically. So you could either leave it improper or you could switch it to be a mixed number. Hugo.
We were taught how to do it, how to not, if you have a mixed number, how to not, like you can just do it above, you don't have to convert it to a improper before.
Hey, wait, what?
You were? We were.
Wait, what are you talking about?
So for today's class, if you know how to do it that way, you can do it that way. But it sounds like a lot of us aren't sure about that. So I don't want to confuse people. So let's do with what we know for right now. Okay. So let's look at how do I switch my mixed number to an improper number. Tatum?
So multiply the 1 times the 4 and then
I multiply the denominator by my whole number, and then I add my numerator. So 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 is 7 fourths, minus 5 eighths. Can I subtract 7 fourths by 5 eighths? Why not? Alexis? You don't have a common denominator. So what would be my common denominator, Evelyn? 8. So in order to get my 4 to be an 8, I need to multiply it by 2. So whatever I do to my denominator, I do to my numerator. And then that is already an 8. So now 14 minus 5 is not 6. 14 minus 5 is 9 eighths. Then I said I'd be okay if you left it improper, or you could switch it back to being proper, make it a mixed number. So what Hugo was saying, in case anybody wants to know his way of doing this, it doesn't always work, but sometimes if we have 1 minus nothing, we keep that whole number of 1. We can change our fractions. If I multiply by a 2, it becomes 6 eighths minus 5 eighths gives us that 1 eighth. The problem that comes in is sometimes that first fraction isn't big enough, and so we have to take from the whole number and add it onto the fraction. So it doesn't always work. There would be times like if it was 1 and 1/4 minus 5 eighths, you couldn't just say 1 minus nothing and then 2 eighths minus 5 eighths. You would have to borrow from that whole number. So there are times that way doesn't work.
I do know how to.
Yeah. But that's why I didn't want to confuse people if they're not sure on how to do it that way. So the way Hugo was talking about works a lot of the time. You can just add or subtract that whole number and add or subtract the mixed number, the fraction, and then work from there. Are there any questions on adding and subtracting fractions? And that is it for our lesson today. So working quietly on both those pages. Remember, Khan Academy needs to get done. So when you are done with our assignment for today, you are working on Khan Academy. A lot of us have a lot of work to do, and it's due tomorrow night. If you are listening at home, we hope you are well and we hope to see you soon.